The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On matters that generally require an urgent debate, there is perhaps a history of contradiction across the House in defence and counter thrust when we have these sorts of debates. I find myself in the unusual position as the first responder on behalf of the government to agree with just about everything that Labor spokesman for Justice has articulated in her intervention. Not all, and we will go into a couple of those details. But it really is difficult to candy coat the findings of the Independent Police Conduct Authority's investigation into complaints with Roastbusters. And I just want to actually contextualise the events that led to the setting up of Operation Clover and the IPCA's review of police's behaviour, because she did talk about former Minister of Police Anne Tolley's role in this, and the fact that there was perhaps some defence of police's actions by the then Minister of Police in respect of the investigations and the knowledge that police had, and indeed there was. But it's why I wanted to contextualise it, because the same information deficit that led Mrs Tolley, quite rightly, to act on the information that was provided to her by police, and police let her down in the failure to provide that information to her because they themselves had not collected the information in the manner and in the means that would have enabled them to respond quickly when the Roastbusters case became public, I think is symptomatic of the failures that the IPCA report has highlighted. And as I say, there is simply no candy coating it. Ms Ardern has outlined a reasonably accurate timeline of the events that led to where we are today. And I want to note, firstly, that those general duties officers who first responded to complaints in the earlier investigations that are described in the IPCA report acted properly and promptly. And they referred those cases to the very team that had been set up in the Waitemata district to deal with just these cases. And it was the CPT officers that, for a number of reasons which I'll elaborate on, dropped the ball, big time. And the IPCA summary at paragraph 116, I think, sums up the essence of the failures. I quote from that report, indeed, the issues were such that it is unlikely they could ever have been dealt with meaningfully and effectively solely by police. Regrettably, police had numerous opportunities to connect the dots earlier, to generate a more organised, expansive and cohesive response, and to work in collaboration with Child, Youth and Family, the schools and the parents of these young men to prevent their behaviour from continuing. And that, to me, is at the heart of this failure. And what is most disappointing to me as Minister of Police is that that revelation is against the backdrop of what I think has actually been really, really good progress by police through their Prevention First and their Policing Excellence program that was set up by Minister Tolley when she was Police Minister, that has led to really, really good outcomes and improvements, reductions in crime, reductions in repeat offending, increases in offending reported on family and sexual violence, which it's really hard to be very sure about. But I'm pretty confident that actually what that is about is a greater level of confidence and support for young women to speak up over this offending. I hope that's the case. I don't think we're seeing a greater incidence of offending, and as we know, the rate of speaking up is still unacceptably too low. And we need to make sure, firstly, that we prevent these offences from occurring and then encourage young women to speak up when they do, confident that they will be treated with respect and listened to and believed. And what worries me about this and this report is that that has the potential to set us back. And so in my questioning of New Zealand Police through Commissioner Bush and his team, and it's naturally, anybody receiving a report like this will accept its findings and work hard, but to ensure that the actions need to be put in place. But there is a deeper requirement going on here, and I need to be sure whether this is a systemic issue and a failure of the system, or whether it is a disappointing exception to a general trend of increasing support for victims of these crimes, and one which needs to be remedied and is already. And it was with that in mind that I have taken the findings of the IPCA report and worked with police to understand three things. Firstly, what confidence can the New Zealand public have that should a similar complaint or complaints be laid tomorrow, that they would be treated differently and taken seriously? Secondly, does this reflect a culture of ambivalence within police towards sexual assault complaints? And thirdly, what can we do as a community, because it is a community problem requiring a community and government response, to provide our young people with better guidance and skills and support around appropriate sexual conduct? And you know, that last point, I think, is probably, for me, as a father of three daughters, the most important thing that can come out of this, that we recheck, that we're doing all that we can to be very clear that this kind of behaviour is not only criminal, but just bad for the young people. It's corrosive. And it speaks to a corrosion within some in our young. I mean, I have a high regard for the vast majority of our young who know how to behave properly and respectfully. But it is a very concerning outcome of this, and I think those three things need to be addressed. And that's what I, as Minister of Police, and working with my ministerial colleagues, will be doing. So to that first question, what confidence can we have that the complaint or complaints will be taken seriously? Well, members don't need and shouldn't take my word for the fact that I have that confidence, that even before this report was released, the police and other social agencies have worked very hard to ensure that there won't be a repeat of this, and I hope that that's the case. As members know, there was a very important Commission of Inquiry in 2007, the Baisley Report into the culture and conduct of police in respect of a number of things, including investigation of adult sexual assault. And I receive a quarterly report from the Office of the Auditor General on the progress of what is a 10-year plan to improve the culture and the performance and the professionalism of police around these sorts of matters. And the most recent report, tabled in this House in February, makes what I think are quite reassuring comments. Police are focusing more on the needs of people who have reported a sexual assault. Some of the victim support organisations, so those are the people who are dealing with the victims of sexual crime every day, that the OAG spoke to, observed that the police were more empathetic than previously. They felt the police had showed greater respect for victims and were focusing on what was right for the victim. And furthermore, in respect of police monitoring sexual assault, because I'm going to come to that in the context of the second question, a senior manager in the police told us that with these types of information, quote, "We know our business the best we've ever known it. We agree that the police now have better reporting systems to provide a good view of their activities. The information indicated that the police's performance in investigating adult sexual assault has improved," end quote. And that's very important to me, both of the quality of the investigations, but more importantly, the joining of the dots. Because I think what the report has revealed is that had the CPT officers investigated in a different way and recorded the findings of their investigations in the NIA database, the police database, it should have joined those dots earlier. Now, we can't be sure whether or not that would have resulted in a prosecution where one hasn't occurred, but what I am sure about is this: had that occurred, a brighter light could have been shone on the activities of these young men sooner, and that could have resulted in prevention of further incidents. And that's actually what police have been focusing on for the last 4 or 5 years. Prevention first. The best way to address the offending is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And they have worked very hard through things like the neighbourhood policing teams, through better patrolling, through contact with a number of organisations to ensure that they act early and professionally. And what's disappointing about this is that that did not happen. So it is incumbent on me as Minister of Police, the Commissioner, his team and every single member of New Zealand Police to reflect on those findings and to make sure that they take every single action that they can to treat complaints seriously, to treat victims with empathy and support, and to record in a way that ensures that patterns of behaviour that start to emerge can be noticed quickly. And I'm encouraged to note that police tell me that they work on the adult sexual assault database, part of the NIA database, now to check that sort of pattern of offending. And so I do hope and expect, in answer to the first question, that if the same behaviour were to occur now, that it would be investigated in a much better way. Is there an ambivalence, a culture of an ambivalence within the police? Well, the IPCA didn't find it, nor did the Auditor General in its most recent quarterly reports. In fact, quite the opposite. Very often when we hear about these sorts of failures, they are systemic failures. In fact, these, it is said by the IPCA, were effectively human failures by officers who should have done a better job, frankly. And so I'm confident and hopeful and optimistic that this does not reveal a culture of ambivalence toward the complainants. And again, I will be monitoring that very closely. And lastly, what can we do as a community to provide our young people with better guidance, better skills, and better manners, frankly, as young men, around appropriate sexual behaviour? There's no easy answers to that. But the Ministry of Education and our schools do have a number of tools available. Members will be aware of Sophie Elliott's mum, Leslie, who has the Loves Me Not program that she is working on around our secondary schools in New Zealand. There are a number of other programs like that, and that are all geared towards changing behaviour and attitudes. There is a ministerial group set up to develop strategies for family and sexual violence, and it cajoles all of the government agencies in that space to work together to get better information to improve our performance in family and sexual violence, and I know it's working. I'm encouraged by what I've seen in my 4 months as a member of that group. Lastly, I want to challenge Jacinda Ardern and Police Association head Greg O'Connor on what I think are actually quite inappropriate comments today around police resourcing. Because I think it is very inappropriate to say that but for police resourcing, this would not have happened. That is unfortunate, and I reject it and I refute it. The IPCA, in fact, quite the opposite. You know what? How much resource has gone into these investigations that with better reporting and better investigating at the start would have prevented a heck of a lot of downstream resource being invested in this. I do think it's inappropriate to refer to that. Police reject it. The IPCA did not say that that was a problem, and the commitment of resources into these types of complaints has not in any way led to the failures that are identified in the IPCA report. Because I ask them every day, and trust me, if they were, they would be very forthcoming in telling me. They have said quite the opposite, and I reject the claims by Ms Ardern and Mr O'Connor that resources had anything to do with this. This is a very disappointing exception to what I think is a trend of better policing in adult sexual assault, and I hope that that standard will be maintained again in the future and we never have another Roastbusters.